Hey, what is up, mortals? Welcome to part 1 season 2 of What If Deku Was in 1B. Just wanted to greet you guys by just saying sit back and relax. You're in for a treat. So we begin. A giant wave of ice came crashing forward as Todoroki expected this match to be over as quickly as his one against Zero because he knew nothing about Izuku. Too focused on his personal problems to care was the big mistake. However, as the sound of a sonic blast echoed out of the stadium, what was that? Todoroki thought. Seeing his eyes shatter, clueless of Izuku's power as he was in the waiting room for his match against Zero when the Greenette was against Shinsu. Instinct raised Todoroki's arms to protect his body as ice formed to stop himself from being thrown out of bounds from the vortex of wind billowing in all directions. Glaring ahead and seeing Izuku's broken middle finger, his heterochromatic eyes were annoyed despite his face showing no emotion, and this time, with more caution, Todoroki sent another ice wave toward Izuku. The Greenette had to abandon control again, sending another bone-breaking blast and letting the built-up wind pressure ricochet back. Damn it, from Izuku's point of view, Todoroki acted just like Endeavor, focused on their own goal rather than giving it his all for the festival, and he didn't like it. He's only using ice for both offense and defense. To win Todoroki caught on immediately as he knew Izuku saw through his problem. The bi-colored boy was already shivering from overusing his quirk in the cavalry battle and outburst against Zero. If this became an endurance match, he was going to lose, sending the third wave of ice out. Izuku once again broke a finger to blast the incoming iceberg into pieces and sent the ricochet of icy winds back. It was very effective because every ice attack was becoming a double-edged sword for the powerhouse of one as he would strain his quirk and also have the ice winds attack back, skating forward on his ice. Todoroki was insinuating a close-range fight as he sent a wave out, this time weaker to see how Izuku would react. The Greenette noticed this and instead sent a 5% smash with his whole arm forward, gritting his teeth. Izuku could feel his arm creak as Todoroki was thrown only halfway across the field, but One for All had not broken his arm. But that wasn't the problem. It's not just his quirk, his judgment, application of skill, mobility. The Greenette knew that Todoroki saw his panic from a close-range fight and braced himself. All his abilities are strong. But Todoroki glanced at Endeavor in amusement as the hero was becoming annoyed because the crowd praised Todoroki for his ice display. Let's get this over with. Todoroki readied to blast another wave of ice when suddenly a hurricane's worth of wind was blown forward and put the whole stadium into shock as Todoroki continuously crashed through many layers of ice to break his fall as Izuku yelled out, "Focus on the match." Izuku could see Todoroki trembling from the cold and was becoming more agitated than when the match first started. His frustration had resulted in power flowing to his now broken hand out of anger as Izuku glared down Todoroki. "You're trembling, Todoroki. Do you even know my name?" Everyone could hear his annoyance as Izuku lifted the broken hand to point at himself. "I am Izuku Midoriya, and I am your opponent." Everyone's fighting with everything they've got to win and get closer to their dream, to become number one. The Greenette looked up from his 3 broken fingers and hand to look at Todoroki. "You want to win like this? You haven't put a single scratch on me. Stop screwing around." Todoroki ran forward, ready to end the match, as Izuku glared ahead. He hated that his opponent wasn't even acknowledging him. "His movements are slower," Monoma pointed out. And it was apparent that the heterochromatic boy's judgment was doing the same. It was as if the scales were tipping as Izuku only became more overbearing in terms of available power left and confidence. Takage nodded in agreement as they watched the match, not even questioning why Izuku was pushing Todoroki to his mental limit as they were both already used to the Greenette's reckless attitude of saving people. Izuku watched as Todoroki got into close range and suddenly ducked down as his opponent stepped off his right foot. "It won't explode. Control it." Bam! Todoroki received a solid hit to the guts from the Greenette and was flung backwards but picked himself up and ran forward again. Bam! They danced a violent exchange, and Izuku flung Todoroki back again as the crowd cheered on the brutal engagement. Bam! Cementos was ready to stop the fight and ask Midnight for her judgment as the two boys began to not think about their physical bodies. "Bam! You're right, Takage. Midoriya not using his quirk is becoming an advantage now," Monoma analyzed because the match was coming to an end. His overuse in the cavalry battle made him a lot weaker. "Damn, everyone is giving it their all. I want to smile and save others." Todoroki crashed into another wall of ice with his body shaking from the cold, his stubbornness becoming his reason for losing as Izuku pushed him toward his physical limit. He blamed his failure on his father as the boy glared at the number 2 hero. Izuku saw this and suddenly ran right up to the staggering ice boy and punched him on the stomach, using his momentum to send the boy back. "I want to be a hero. That's my dream. Why are you watching him?" Like an intake of breath, A moment of silence forced an uneasy wave of emotions through the stadium as Todoroki listened to Izuku's words for once. His body airborne. "Where are you looking, Todoroki?" Todoroki didn't know what to think. He had despised Endeavor his whole life and wanted nothing else than to reject him. But as a result, he ended up watching and becoming more aware of his father because of his hatred, without him even realizing it. He had stayed in his father's shadow with no clear goals. He had no set future that he was running toward and instead had been going in circles. His body hit the floor with a heavy thud. And Todoroki looked up at the sky, his consciousness wavering. Despite the air being heavy with ice, he could clearly see the warm sky above. And a feeling of nostalgia washed over him. Todoroki could feel that Izuku shook his resentment. And although he couldn't just let go of his emotions, he knew his mindset had changed, even just a little, as his shivering body lay on the cold floor, unable to move no longer. Todoroki looked over at Izuku, who was also at his limit. A wisp of air escaped his lips before Todoroki finally fell unconscious. It was almost bittersweet as Midnight looked at Todoroki, who wore a peaceful expression despite being beaten up. With only one conscious, she raised her whip and let her voice ring out. Midoriya advances to the next round. At the announcement, Izuku's adrenaline rush finally subsided, and the greenette fell to his knees. "I can heal him," Recovery Girl said as she examined Izuku's hands. "You should be thankful that Todoroki already used half of his ice before the match, or else your hands would have needed surgery." Recovery Girl was scolding both Toshinori and Izuku for being reckless when the door burst open. Takage and Monoma were the first to start talking, with one praising and the other scolding as Awase and half the class walked in too. "What about the match?" Izuku asked, a little confused but grateful for his class's worry. "It's Shizaki against Komori. They'll take a while since they're both long-range quirk-relying fighters, but Shizaki will probably win with the sunny weather today," Monoma informed as Recovery Girl told them to keep their voices down. She showed them out of the room, and the greenette turned to look at the screen, just like Monoma predicted. Despite both being equal with the humidity in the air from Izuku's battle, Shizaki turned the tides of the match. Both quirks relied on moisture, but Shizaki was more potent with the sun too, without a breeze to carry her spores. Komori found herself held up like a sacrifice to the sky. The next match was Mina Ashido against Momo Yaoyorozu as the alien-like girl threw acid in all directions. However, Yaoyorozu made herself a shield coated with glass, so it didn't corrode before throwing a refined powder all around. Mina didn't understand, but as she tried to run up close, her acid reacted with the substance Yaoyorozu made and rendered it useless. "What?" she cried out in confusion as Yaoyorozu made another net gun and shot it. She neutralized it with a base, Monoma explained to the equally confused Awase, who nodded. It was just introductory chemistry but effective against Mina as Midnight announced Yaoyorozu's win. Izuku's hands were as good as new. Although he was exhausted as a side effect of Recovery Girl's quirk, he was given a simple sling to make sure he didn't move too much before his next match as the greenette got out of the infirmary bed. Todoroki was also awake now, and the boy looked over at Izuku. There was a change, and the greenette noticed it and waited for him to speak. "Midoriya," he spoke slowly, remembering Izuku's name. "I want to be a hero." A smile danced onto Izuku's lips as he walked toward the door. The two exchanged no words as they had said enough, and the greenette left, leaving Todoroki with his thoughts. Izuku reached the stadium to hear Tetsu cheering on Kirishima and Honuki, looking at the steel boy questioningly. I missed 2 rounds." Izuku wanted to write more in his notebook but sighed before turning to see Kirishima push Bakugo into a hand-to-hand combat fight. Kaken's on defense. A string of muttering escaped his lips as he analyzed Kirishima's hardening quirk. "I got notes if you want them." "Monoma." Izuku stopped and turned to see Monoma again, who had a piece of paper. "I wrote down notes on their quirks. I'll add the next few rounds too." Izuku gratefully nodded as they stayed by the top of the stairs and watched as Bakugo's explosion started to work against the redhead. He was using his quirk in full defense to go offense and now reached his limit. Izuku mumbled as Bakugo saw the tides change in his favor and sent a relentless volley of explosions forward. Each one added more injuries to Kirishima, who could only stand still and take the damage. Die. With one last upward blast, Bakugo aimed for Kirishima's chin and sent the redhead flying backwards. Kirishima's body fell to the floor, and Midnight announced Bakugo's advancement. "You idiot!" Tetsu yelled out, having a mini rampage as Awase avoided the fists. Honuki was still unsure how to react to the raging boy next to him, and Shizaki pretended none of this was happening. Light gave the crowd a brief break as Izuku nodded to Monoma, And the blonde returned to the stands as Izuku went to the waiting room. It was his fight next, and he had one good arm, even if Recovery Girl had healed the other. He couldn't use it yet without receiving sustained damage. But it was enough as the Greenette spun ideas on how to combat Shizaki. Izuku knew how her quirk worked since he had seen it up close twice. Even if she did have a physical limit, he was at a disadvantage with the sun shining, knowing she could use her vines underground as observed from her side against Kaminari. The Greenette knew he had to be airborne to fight her. It was another reckless plan, but it was the best one he could think of as Izuku stepped out onto the stage. The first match of the semifinals, Izuku Midoriya vs Ibara Shizaki. Mike's voice rang out as he started the match. And just like Izuku predicted, Shizaki's vines grew out like a wave and into the ground. Crouching down, Izuku charged 5% into his legs and, without damaging them, jumped high into the air in a similar fashion to the USJ fight, falling toward Shizaki. He waited patiently for the one thing he noticed during her and Denki Kaminari's exchange. As the wave of vines shot out of the ground, Shizaki let her vines detach from her hair so she could move to grow more. But during that 1 second, Izuku grinned. Smash! Once again, Izuku sent a small burst of wind at Shizaki's unprotected back, only using 5% as he landed in her vines. Although the vine coffin caught Izuku, Midnight announced his win as the vine girl stood, slightly shocked, out of bounds. Cheers erupted from the crowd as Mike announced the next match. Momo Yaoyorozu vs Katsuki Bakugo. Bakugo's rush is unstoppable, even though Yaoyorozu was making herself shields against Bakugo's explosions. It backfired as Bakugo's downward projection made her legs weak. It was as if Yaoyorozu was going against a homing missile that only got faster and faster as he dodged her attacks, and within 2 minutes, he had knocked her to the floor with a foot to her back. Phew, that's brutal. Mike sighed as Midnight announced Bakugo's win when Yaoyorozu gave up. With this, the final match is going to be Bakugo vs Midoriya. Izuku froze when the blonde turned to make eye contact from the stage. But he didn't crumble as they glared at each other for a moment before Mike announced the final break. That's 2 recommendation students he just fought off. Takage sighed as she leaned back against her seat. 2. Takage nodded. Yep. Momo took the recommendation exam as I did. Wait, you're a recommendation student? Izuku gasped at Takage, who nodded. And Monoma was also intrigued. So you were the 4th. Well, it just means I need to work harder so I can lead, you know. Takage smiled. And Izuku nodded. So the 4 recommendation students were Todoroki, Yaoyorozu, Honuki and you. They turned to see the one who beat half the recommendation students casually walking off the stage. And Takage gave a positive tap to Izuku's arm. You beat a recommendation student too. And the top recommendation student at that. So don't doubt yourself and do your best, Deku. Izuku nodded, and with cheers of support from his whole class, the Greenette smiled and left for the waiting room. Bakugo had been on a roll. Just like Mike had said, from declaring he would be number 1 to Izuku to receiving a challenge from Todoroki in the changing rooms before the festival, with his team underneath Izuku's in the cavalry battle. The blonde was ready to fight, and Izuku felt almost identical as he took off his sling. Recovery had given him the clear to fight with both arms again. And Izuku went over his thoughts. He was about to fight someone he considered to be the definition of winning. The person who was the reason for both his pain and determination a few months ago. The very concept of fighting back against Bakugo terrified him. But the Greenette knew that something was different now, whether it was his newfound confidence or his wish to surpass Bakugo. The goal, or maybe both. The Greenette clenched his fist as the opportunity had arrived quicker than he expected. Bam! The door was kicked open. And Izuku faced a confused Bakugo who was about to blow up but saw that he had kicked down the wrong waiting room door. Hello, Kaken, Izuku said, his body stiff as he didn't want to stutter. Bakugo just looked at him and saw that Izuku was preparing to fight before letting out a malicious grin. I'll crush you, stupid Deku. You better not hold back that shitty borrowed quirk of yours. I'll be on top. Izuku knew better than to say anything to irritate Bakugo further. But he couldn't keep quiet as he stood up from his seat. Deku now means you can do it. It's not going to be the same anymore. I plan to win. The wait was over. And the crowds were excited. Cheers erupted from all around the stadium as Mike announced the last battle of the UA Sports Festival. We'll determine who's at the top. It's time for the final. From 1B, Izuku Midoriya, and 1A, Katsuki Bakugo. The 2 boys observed each other as Mike took a deep breath. Start. Bakugo let out a brutal explosion to propel his body toward Izuku. The Greenette ducked down at the last second, however, and grabbed the blonde's right arm, with a toss more accurate than his one on Shinsu. Izuku used Bakugu's vicious momentum against him and threw him back first to the floor. Bakugu coughed from the unexpected maneuver but immediately got up and went airborne. Izuku knew that Bakugu had the advantage from above because although he could go up the same way, his price was a broken bone. I need this match to be quick. The longer this drags out, the stronger Kaken gets. I need to end this quickly. Bakugu knew that dragging it out would result in his win, but his pride would not allow it, even if it put him at a disadvantage. The blonde was going to pick up the slugfest offer Izuku put down. Training his whole life had slowly developed the explosive boy's body, so his muscles and quirk were at their physical peak. And for Izuku, he had been buffing up his body at breakneck speeds as he lifted inhuman weights by cleaning that beach for 10 months. It was a battle between a priceless refined jewel against a diamond in the rough. Bakugu came aggressively shooting down from the sky as Izuku dodged out the way. But Bakugu had anticipated this and used an offensive explosion to direct himself, roughly body slamming into Izuku. He grabbed the greenette by the hand and flipped him over his back, stomach first toward the ground, but Izuku landed on his feet and jumped backwards from his grasp. With no hesitation, Izuku ran forward again and used his momentum to slam into Bakugu's chest, trying to catch him off balance. But the blonde grabbed his wrist and spun around him, aiming with threatening explosions. Izuku grit his teeth as he felt his UA uniform's sleeve burn away, and there was some distance between the two as they momentarily glared at each other fiercely. "Stop holding back on me, Deku!" Bakugu roared out in a terrorizing tone before firing an explosion suddenly, wildly rushing his hot-headed body forward from the ricochet as he aimed his other hand. Izuku saw this, and although he wanted to keep it at 5%, the fact that Bakugu had not used the hand he was aiming with hadn't gone unnoticed. Izuku knew the next blast was something his 5% punch couldn't block and grit his teeth, trying to see how to not kill with his quirk but still use its power. Bakugu came in with a hot-tempered left hook, and Izuku jumped diagonally before landing on his hands and feet. The greenette sprung back and tensed as he aimed the fatal finger, not at Bakugu, but at the floor where he stood instead, and with the sound of a sonic blast echoing out, the stadium floor broke into pieces and hurtled toward the bloodthirsty Bakugu. A flurry of accurately aimed, inhumanly fast, ferocious explosions came from Bakugu, and he smirked at Izuku's broken finger barbarically. "That's it, come at me, Deku, with all you've got." His face was violently pleased as Bakugu and Izuku repeated their powerful barrage of potentially lethal attacks. Bakugu would run in for close range, and the two would engage in a destructive hand-to-hand combat brawl where Izuku would receive damage. The greenette would be kicked in the face and punched in the guts as Izuku heartlessly elbowed Bakugu's ribs and threw him off his body. Before the two would separate, Izuku would receive another blast to his body before aiming another stadium-shattering blow. The immediate defense showed off Bakugu's expertise as the blonde bombarded all the rubble and rocks away in frenzied precision and ran forward again for the slugfest. Even though Izuku was heavily injured and down to his last 3 fingers, Bakugu was also panting heavily. His body was not unscathed as small pieces of low-flying rubble had tattered his uniform, and the sweat on his body crackled as they remained in their fighting stances. And without paying any attention to the cheers, screams, and yells from the people watching, the two boys grinned. They have never spoken about anything in their lives nor ever agreed. Yet here on the battlefield, everything was laid out. It was a battle for not only the winning spot but for their pride, their ideals, and their unwavering emotions. The desire to win and the desire to save. Bakugu could feel his expanded pores screaming in pain from continuously using his quirk and, out of reflex, grabbed into it. "Here's my chance." Izuku savagely barreled forward as close as he could before aiming his third-to-last finger at the floor where Bakugu stood. A destructive wind pressure broke out, and the violent gusts of wind slammed into Bakugu, sending his body backwards. But with controlled explosions, the blonde spun in the air and stayed in bounds. But Izuku didn't let him take the chance to regain his balance. With a yell, the greenette aimed at Bakugu's airborne body and knew that he was too far away to be in the kill range. A ruthless discharge of wind was blasted forward and tore toward Bakugu, who saw the incoming deadly blast. His face scrunched up into a malevolent smile as his body started to rotate into the air. The wind pressure hit the blonde, and he was thrown high into the air, and a brief moment of silence held the stadium captive, using his already spinning body's momentum to rotate faster. Bakugu used multiple minor explosions like a cannon before coming down like a murderous black vortex. Izuku had a second to realize that Bakugu was accelerating with the Monroe effect as the blonde's thunderous voice yelled out, "Howitzer!" Izuku was on his last finger as he aimed it directly at the incoming Bakugu. Detroit. The two could face each other clearly in that single moment as they both yelled out their final moves. Impact. Divided by smash. They screamed in sync as they aimed a fatal blast at each other. And the whole stadium erupted in smoke and rubble as Cementos and Midnight were too late to intervene. Mike finally got his voice back as he was silent to watch the intense fight. And he waited for the smoke to clear. The winner is. Midnight walked into the chaos and looked around for the two students. She saw someone blown out of bounds and raised her arm toward the sky. Midoriya is out of bounds. Bakugo wins. Thank you all for watching the video to the end. Now there are a few more things that I'd like to go over before the video ends. On behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank the writer for this video, as well as the editor for this video. Their details will be in the description. If you're a voice actor, editor, or writer, or you're interested in becoming one of those, go to the Discord in the description of this video and hit up the head of one of those areas. We're always looking for members to join us. That's it from us for today's video. Thank you all for watching, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you're interested, and hit that like button if you liked the video. Until next time, peace out mortals, have a fantastic day.